The letter came on a Friday. Robert Whitfield almost threw it away. It was sitting at the bottom of a stack of mail he had let accumulate for 11 days on the kitchen counter of his Denver, Colorado apartment, the kind of accumulation that happens when a person is going through something and the ordinary administrative tasks of being alive start to feel like they require more energy than is currently available. Bills, a magazine he hadn't subscribed to, a furniture catalog, 2 pieces of mail for the previous tenant whose name he had been meaning to write on the envelope and return to the mailbox for 3 months, and 1 plain white envelope, no return address, his name and address written in handwriting he didn't recognize. He opened it last after the bills, after throwing away the catalog, after setting aside the previous tenant's mail with renewed intention to actually deal with it this time. He opened it the way you open something unfamiliar, carefully, with the low-grade alertness of not knowing what's inside. 1 page handwritten, black ink, not blue, small, careful letters. He read it standing at the kitchen counter. At the bottom, no last name, no formal signature, no careful professional distance. Just a Marcus. Robert stood at the counter for a long time after reading it. Long enough that the light in the apartment changed as the afternoon moved. Long enough that he read it 3 more times, which told him something about what it had done to him. Because Robert Whitfield was not a man who read things multiple times. He was a man who read things once, processed them efficiently, and moved forward. This was how he had operated for 47 years, and it had served him reasonably well in professional contexts and considerably less well in personal ones. Marcus Webb had been Robert's best friend for 19 years. Had been clown past tense, the specific grammar of something that used to be true and was no longer, which was a tense. Robert had been living in for 14 months without fully accepting the verb change. They had met at a construction firm in Denver where both of them were working. Robert as a project manager, Marcus as a structural engineer, and had become friends in the way that men sometimes become friends. In their late 20s, which is less by choice than by accumulation. Enough shared hours, enough mutual respect, enough evidence that the other person is someone whose company makes things slightly better than they would otherwise be. They had gone to each other's weddings. They had called each other through divorces, Robert's, which happened at 34, and Marcus's, which happened at 41. They had been the kind of friends who didn't need an occasion to talk but also didn't talk every day, existing in that middle space of genuine closeness that doesn't require constant maintenance because the foundation is solid enough not to need it. And then 14 months ago, at a work event, a company dinner that neither of them had particularly wanted to attend, Marcus had said something. It was not a large thing. It was the kind of thing that, described plainly to a third party, sounds like a misunderstanding or an overreaction. A comment Marcus had made about Robert's management of a project they had both worked on, said in front of colleagues, with a specificity that suggested he had been thinking about it for some time and had chosen the wrong moment and the wrong audience to say it. Robert had felt it the way you feel, something when it catches you, exactly where you didn't know you were, unguarded, not with anger immediately, but with the particular cold clarity of a person who has just understood something about how they are seen. He had not said anything at the dinner. He had driven home and sat in his apartment, and by morning, the cold clarity had become something harder, and he had decided, without quite deciding, to let the friendship lapse. Marcus had called twice. Robert had replied with brief texts. Fine, busy. Talk soon. That communicated clearly enough. If you knew how to read them, that talk soon was not going to happen. Marcus had apparently stopped calling after the second attempt, which Robert had told himself was evidence that the friendship had been less solid than he thought. He had told himself this for 14 months. The letter did not apologize. That was the first thing Robert noticed on his second reading. That Marcus had not led with sorry, had not opened with the specific defensive crouch of someone trying to manage another person's anger. He had started plainly the way Marcus did most things, which was one of the reasons Robert had valued his company for 19 years. Marcus wrote that he had been thinking about the dinner for 14 months, that he had replayed it many times and understood having done so that what he said had been careless in public, in a way that was not fair and that he should have known better. He wrote that he had spent the first few months after Robert stopped responding, telling himself that Robert was being oversensitive, and that he had spent the months after that slowly recognizing that this was easier to believe than the alternative, which was that he had genuinely hurt someone he cared about and needed to say so directly. He wrote that 19 years was a thing he did not want to lose over a failure of judgment at a work dinner. He wrote that he was not asking for things to go back to the way they were immediately, because he understood that trust, once jarred, required time to restabilize, and he was not interested in pretending that time had passed when it hadn't. He wrote that he was going to be in Denver in 3 weeks for a conference, that he would be at the coffee shop on 17th Street, the one where they had met every other Thursday, for 6 years before the dinner, and on the Saturday morning of that weekend at 9 a.m., that he would be there whether Robert came or not, because he needed to say what he was going to say in person, and he was going to make himself available for it. He signed it Marcus. Robert put the letter on the kitchen counter. He went for a run, which was what he did when he needed to think without thinking, when the direct approach to a problem was less useful than giving his mind peripheral access to it while his body was occupied with something else. He ran 4 miles through the Denver streets in the early evening light, past the coffee shop on 17th Street without letting himself look at it, and came home and made dinner and watched 40 minutes of television without retaining anything he watched. He called his sister Carol, who lived in Phoenix and was 3 years older and had the particular quality of knowing when to give advice and when to simply witness. He told her about the letter. He told her about the dinner. He told her in less detail but enough about the 14 months. Carol listened completely. Then she said, "What do you actually want?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." Robert was quiet for a moment. "I want the 19 years back," he said. "I want to not have spent 14 months treating the whole thing like a verdict instead of an incident." "Those aren't the same thing," Carol said. "What Marcus did?" "No," Robert said. "They're not." He paused. "But I think I've been acting like they are." Carol didn't say anything. She didn't need to. "He's going to be at the coffee shop," Robert said. 3 weeks from now." "I know," Carol said. "You told me." "I don't know if I'm going." Carol was quiet for a moment. Then, "Robert, you called me at 8 p.m. on a Friday night to talk about a letter from a man you haven't spoken to in over a year. You are going." He went. Not without difficulty. Not without the specific resistance that belongs to pride, the particular stubbornness of a person who has held a position for long enough that abandoning it feels like losing something, even when the position was never worth holding. He sat in his apartment on the Saturday morning for 20 minutes past the time he needed to leave, arguing with himself in the way that people argue with themselves when they have already decided and are waiting for the decision to feel comfortable, which it almost never does before you act on it. He drove to 17th Street. Marcus was already there when Robert walked in. At their table, the corner one by the window, 2 coffees on the table. He looked up when Robert entered, and Robert could see, from across the coffee shop, that Marcus had not been certain he would come. The particular expression of a man who has made himself available for something and doesn't know until the last moment whether it's going to happen. Robert sat down. They looked at each other across the table. "I was careless," Marcus said. He didn't build to it. He just said it, the way the letter had been written, plainly, without defensive architecture. What I said where I said it. I was careless with something that mattered. Robert picked up the coffee cup. 14 months is a long time to not answer a phone, he said. Yes, Marcus said, it is. I was angry. I know. And then I wasn't angry anymore, and I didn't know how to walk it back, without it feeling like I was giving something up. Marcus looked at him steadily. What were you giving up? Robert thought about this honestly, which was harder than it sounded because the honest answer was less flattering than the version he had been telling himself. The feeling of being right, he said finally, which I've been holding on to for 14 months in place of an actual friend. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's honest. Your letter was honest first." They sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, Denver was going about its Saturday morning, ordinary and unhurried, and entirely indifferent to the fact that two men were sitting in a corner, coffee shop trying to find their way back to 19 years of something real. "I'm not the same person I was before that dinner," Robert said. "Not as a complaint, just as a fact." "Neither am I," Marcus said. "I didn't like who I was at that dinner. I've been thinking about it for 14 months. "Good," Robert said. "And then, because honesty was apparently what today required, so have I." They talked for 2 hours. Not about the dinner. Not about what had been lost in the 14 months. About everything else. The accumulated ordinary things that friends talk about when they have been out of contact and are finding their way back to the texture of each other's lives. Marcus's son had started college. Robert had changed apartments. A project they had both worked on years ago had won an award neither of them had heard about. Small things. The small things being the point, not the footnote. When they left, they shook hands on the sidewalk outside. Not the formality of strangers, but the deliberate acknowledgement of men who understand that some things need to be marked to be real. "Same time, 2 weeks?" Marcus said. Robert looked at him. At the 19 years, at the 14 months, at the specific distance between a careless dinner and a letter signed with just a first name and a Saturday morning coffee shop on 17th Street. "Yeah," he said. "Same time." He drove home in the October morning light and called Carol, who answered on the first ring because she had been waiting, and he said simply, "I went," and she said, "I know you did," and he said, "It's going to be okay," and she said, "It was always going to be okay. You just had to get out of the way." He sat in his car in the parking lot of his apartment building for a moment after hanging up, thought about the letter, about the plain white envelope, about the single word at the bottom of one handwritten page that had done what 14 months of silence had not been able to do. Sometimes one word said clearly and without pretense is the whole of what's required. Just a name. Just the truth of who is asking. Just a Marcus.